Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversational AI in Fintech. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks to everybody for joining in today for this event. As you all know, the format of the event is we have this keynote followed by a panel discussion where we'll be talking about the impact that conversational AI, chat, voice, everything in between is having on financial services and fintech. Very quickly about me, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Haptik. Haptik is one of the world's largest conversational AI platforms. We implement chat and voice-driven bot solutions for large enterprises globally across the Americas, Asia, Africa, as well as Australia and other places. We a couple of years back were acquired by Reliance Jio Platforms, which is one of Asia's largest conglomerates, and now we operate as an independent group company. Um, Outside of that, I also invest and advise in several startups across Asia and America. That keeps me entertained and humble. And yeah, super excited to be here to talk about some of our findings and where we think the market is going. So what does Haptik do? We power omni-channel virtual assistants that essentially help improve your end customer experience while bringing about either an increase in top line or reduction in costs. Like I said, conversational AI is a technology that we have pioneered, and essentially we use it to build these intelligent agents that can deliver a much more superior experience for your customers. We have, over the course of our journey, which is now in the 8th year, processed more than 4 billion end customer interactions. That makes us amongst the top 5 or 7 largest globally. We have over 200 solutions live across 6 different countries. We've been fortunate to service some of the largest Fortune 500 customers, and also we've reached more than 100 million consumers who interacted with a conversational solution that's been powered by Haptik. We service some of the leading financial institutions globally across insurance companies, mortgage, fintech, a little bit of banking, broking, securities, essentially anything that involves an end consumer touchpoint interacting with a financial entity. We've had the experience of dealing with across different markets globally. And finally, I promise the last plug of Haptik. We were recently recognized by G2, which is one of the world's leading software and services websites for reviews. We were recognized with them as a category leader in bot platforms and live chat. And we were also fortunate to get a special recognition as, we had one of the highest ratings on the platform. So we got this really nice and cute users love us badge. So what does the market look like? And, we've obviously spent a majority of our lives trying to pioneer and build this, like I said. These are numbers that seem very exciting, but there's always a question of what do you make of them? And the short answer is that the market is extremely large at this point. Every brand or enterprise or customer out there is looking for a solution in this category to do one of various things. The low-hanging fruit has been customer support, which is this whole data point around how every chatbot interaction saves you about 70 cents. But we are gradually now transitioning to even to use cases that are more top of the funnel in the customer journey, such as customer acquisition, lead generation, conversation commerce. So we think that this is still very much early days. I think the most of the exciting work in this category is going to happen over now the next decade or so. I'm sure a lot of you would have seen a version of this slide somewhere before, either when talking about AI or for that matter, any emerging technology. If you think about any emerging tech and if you try to put it on a graph, you're always talking about, the use cases and technology. And if you think about this graph over here, x-axis represents the complexity of the use cases that can be solved, and the y-axis represents the maturity of the technology itself. And we think that conversational AI in fintech particularly is in this bottom left quadrant, where not only the technology a bit early and it still needs to get matured, but also some of the use cases that are being deployed are still very simple and straightforward. These are typically single turn, right? Which is, hey, what is my balance? Get me the answer. What's my address? I need to change my address. Things that are still very much what we call L1 in terms of customer to business interaction. So, as you can tell, and as I'm sure a lot of you over here are interested in knowing is, how do you get more to the top right? How do you start, really using AI to its fullest to solve really complex problem statements and really complex tasks at hand? And talking about simplicity versus complexity, here are some of the most common use cases that we see across financial services and fintech. I'd like to categorize them in sort of first two high level categories, and then one of them has a few subcategories. But basically, it comes down to, are you using this solution to be external facing, which is interacting with your customers externally, or we're now starting to see emerge use cases that are internal to the organization to try and help better the employee experience as well. Let's talk about the external ones first, right? The low hanging fruit is what we call customer service or customer support, which is the how do you engage existing customers to actually engage to sort of interact with a conversational AI solution and essentially get resolution to their support queries a lot faster. However, there are two new categories we're starting to see emerge. One is what we call the new customer acquisition. So things like eligibility of mortgage, things like eligibility, of credit. All of these pieces are also where we're seeing voice and chatbots, come into their own to try and interact with consumers and get it done. And then one other interesting category we're seeing is most financial services organizations, you have your end consumers, but you also have your merchant or partner network. If you're a payments organization, it'll typically be your small merchants. If you are an insurance company, it could be your insurance agents. But there's also this large category of, partners or merchants that organizations typically work with, where again, we're seeing a lot of use cases emerge, such as onboarding, frequently asked questions, a lot of other aspects where, chatbots and voice bots are participating. And then, like I said, the internal employee-driven use cases are also ones which we're seeing great adoption for. It can be quite complicated and time-consuming for an employee to find the right information across complex HRMS systems. And that's where we're finding that actually implementing an AI-driven conversation solution can make lives a lot easier and faster. So as you guys know, we did this entire survey and a lot of you participated in it. So thank you so much for your time. And through this, there were a lot of different findings that we came out with, but I wanted to highlight three things that I found were most interesting. The first was that about half of the respondents who we surveyed said that they'd already implemented some sort of chatbot technology. Whereas a lot of you may think that everybody's done it, I was surprised. I actually thought that not as many people would have tried some version of a chatbot. I think the fact that half of you have already done it is a great start. It's actually great that you've already given it a shot. You've seen what works, what does not work. And now the next stage of the journey is going to be very fruitful in terms of actually seeing the results this can have on your business. The second was, I was very curious to know how many people actually think this works. So I was very curious to see that do people actually think that these can solve problems. And again, about half of you agree that chatbots can do a great job, particularly at customer service. They can actually solve the problem. And like I said, we're still in early days, right? We're still in early days in the technology becoming a lot better. So the fact that it's already doing the job to some degree is a great sign, and these numbers are only going to get better over the next 2 years. And then finally, the last one, right? This entire battle between should I do text first, voice first, how do chat versus voice work with each other? And we found, which I also agree with, that half the respondents believe that both text and voice bots should be deployed together. the way to think about this is like a website and an app, right? Like you're going to have both. You're going to have a website, you're going to have some sort of mobile presence, either a mobile website or a mobile app. And ultimately, it will come down to the consumer's choice on how and what they want to do. So you are going to have both a chat and a voice bot. It's a matter of time. Now, how you want to spin it out, when you want to do it, that depends upon a lot upon your internal resources, your own digital transformation initiatives. But definitely, the sooner the better. And if you do it together, then even better. So this question of where are we headed, and I like to break this up in sort of these 4 steps, right? Um, Today, what we are is what we call chatbots, voice bots, fairly rule-based platforms, solving basic tasks. Next level or the next evolution of these is going to be genuinely first generation of AI-powered systems, which are very contextual, very intelligent in terms of understanding nuances about your domain and about your vertical, and being able to solve more complex tasks. But what's interesting is what happens after that, right? Step 3 and step 4. I think within 3 to 4 years, we'll truly be able to get to unsupervised systems. Essentially, one of the biggest questions that we get asked all the time is that, okay, great, a bot that can do a lot, but it still requires a lot of training and manual, figuring out flows and entering of data. Um, where this becomes really exciting is when the bots can genuinely start learning on their own, this whole concept of self-learning. And when the bots can really embrace the power of unsupervised learning based upon the questions the customers are asking. And then finally, where we want to get to in 5 to 7 years is this entire idea of multimodal pervasive systems. There should be no debate in some time about chat versus voice, screen versus no screen, phone versus app. Ideally, you should be able to use one underlying AI model and then sort of build on top of that and put it across whatever touch point you need, whatever channel works for you. And then the customer should have their choice on what channel they want to use to engage with sort of your service. So very quickly, haptics take beyond the utopian vision of where we want to get to. What does immediately the next 6 to 12 months look like? This whole idea of shifting away from purely being customer support driven to an entire conversational AI strategy, which can be banking driven, or capturing this entire journey of the customer through sort of a conversational interface. I always like to use the analogy: you have a mobile app, you have a website, now you're going to have a conversational interface that will cut through every single aspect of the customer's journey. The whole idea that these things will have to become a lot more intelligent, will have to solve complex tasks, and will eventually become more human. We've touched upon that. But finally, the last piece I want to leave you with is to make all of this happen. Brands, fintechs, financial services, banks, everybody, right, will have to ensure that the data architecture is there to support it. Your customer record systems, your CRMs, the way you interact with merchants, all of these, the underlying data systems will have to become very powerful for them to then feed into these systems. So I would highly encourage you to think deeply about that, because whether it is coming from your data source or the customer's questions, supervised, unsupervised, at the end of the day, an AI solution is only as good as the data it gets. So on that note, thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Aakrit. That was a great presentation. And thank you everyone in the audience for joining us here today about conversational AI in fintech. And my name is Sanjib Kalita. I'm the editor-in-chief at Money 2020. I'm also the CEO of Guppy.ai. And I'm joined here with 3 industry luminaries for a great panel about this topic. And just a quick bit about myself. I actually embody both AI as well as fintech. I actually, about 30 years ago, I used to do research and published research in an IEEE conference about artificial neural networks to classify electrocardiographic arrhythmia. So that was really looking at what we're talking about right now seems like science fiction, but science fiction is now present. And I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I worked at Citibank. Then I worked on a fintech startup that we sold to Google, and then worked on a fintech conference business called Money 2020, which was also acquired, and now building my latest fintech startup. So really deep in both of these topics, and so actually that's why I'm so glad that we have the panelists that we do today. And obviously, with the large number of attendees, that talks to the interest in the market about what we're talking about. Also, I think it talks a lot about the potential. And Aakrit talked about it, how we're in the early days, and that I definitely believe that there's a lot that's going to happen in the next few years. So, actually, if I can ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Actually, maybe Miranda, why don't you kick us off with a quick background about yourself?
Sorry, I remember that. But then, so my name is Miranda Tan, and I'm the CEO. I'm the CMO and founder of Paybby. And Paybby is a digital bank for the Black and Brown community. And our mission is to recirculate capital back to the community and to provide banking accounts to the unbanked and underbanked. So a little bit about my background. So prior to Paybby, I was also a serial entrepreneur, and I had my own PR agency for about 15 years. And then I got into marketing technology, where I worked, where I using big data and AI, profiling reporters and figuring out who are the best people to contact. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to this panel.
Thank you, Miranda. Actually, David, if you'd go next.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sanjib. My name is David Heafitz. I'm with Prudential Financial. I've been with Prudential for just about 20 years in a number of roles across enterprise technology. Most recently, I manage a portfolio of enterprise applications focusing on employee engagement. And through that lens, in the past few years, I became involved in leveraging voice technologies for accessibility and making sure we have opportunities for employees and non-employees alike to be able to have equal access to all our systems and technologies at Prudential as they came in. In addition to that, I'm a board member of I'm an ambassador on the Open Voice Network, an ambassador to the Irish Tech Society, and I'm a board member of an organization called the Change Machine, which promotes technology for an equitable economy via a suite of solutions or platforms for financial planning for underserved communities. I also in Prudential work a lot with our VC partners and advise a number of startups in the health and wellness space, and both as part of my enterprise responsibilities and personal interests.
That's a great background, David. And Aakrit, I know you already give a little background about yourself, but could you give us a little broader background about even how you got into this space?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sanjeev, and good to connect with everybody over here. Yeah, I think people have heard me enough over the last 10 or 15 minutes. But yeah, besides everything that I guess we just spoke about, we basically founded Haptik with this mission that. Interacting with businesses shouldn't be this hard. Um, Essentially, a lot of the times that we want to reach out to a business or an enterprise or a brand, it feels um, it feels a lot of effort in our head in terms of what it will take to get something done. So really, the mission for us was that how do we make that a lot easier? How do we implement artificial intelligence, to solve that problem? And yeah, like I said, in our eighth year, as with any other startup, as a lot of you will know over here, gone through a fair share of twists, turns, ups and downs, and especially in a field like AI, where it's a lot of trial and error until you really figure it out, and until you really sort of get kind of your product to finally work. So yeah, and that's where we are today, and very excited for this discussion.
That's great, Aakrit. And I actually, obviously we're talking about very abstract concepts, AI, chatbots, fintech, and it's really hard to think about this just in pure abstraction. And so, for folks that are coming into this, are there any frameworks that one might use to evaluate potential solutions? Are there any frameworks to figure out like what might work, what might not work? I actually, if I can ask, maybe let's start with you, David. How do you, do you have any frameworks as far as how you look at this topic?
Yeah, I'm going to talk in broad terms. Earlier you heard in his keynote, Aakrit talked about the fact that we're at an early stage of adoption in terms of the innovation cycle of voice technology or AI for chatbots in either sense. What's I think most important is that since we're at an early stage, is that we look at equitable design or inclusive design early on before it progresses further along in that maturity or the complexity scales that he talked about. So there are quite a bit of frameworks. There's different ways to look at them, but what I think is most important and what I urge colleagues and my peers to consider is how can we make sure that as we proceed and we're at the beginning stage and early stage of this, that we look at equitable distribution, equitable design, and inclusive design as we build out the structure for engaging consumers and employees alike through chatbots, AI, and voice.
That's great, David, because also to be perfectly honest, that's probably not the first thing that comes to mind, but I think that's a very important point to bring up. Miranda, any thoughts as far as how frameworks or how you look at this problem generally?
Yeah, I think for us, for Paybby, since we're trying to deal with the market that's mostly black and brown. For us, when we were looking at chat boxes, it was basically a need because for us as a company, we were trying to figure out what's the easy way to help our customers, onboard them and also get them the help they need. So one of the things we came about with is we have a chat box. It's called the Paybot, since our company's called Paybby. So for the Paybot, one of our main thing was when people came on, we wanted to just quickly understand what was their problem, what do they need help with, and get them to the right person. So a lot of times, personally, when I call a bank, I'm always trying to talk to a live person because a lot of times either it's voice or text. It's you just want to figure out who's the right person to talk to. So for our community, right, it was pretty simple. It was just we had these people. A lot of these people, they wanted a bank account or they wanted access to PPP loans. So we just want to provide a really easy solution. What is your problem? Are you looking for a bank account? Okay, click here. Here's our customer support. Or tell us your problem. Are you looking for a loan? Yes? Okay, click 2. So our whole thing was trying to help our customers basically get to the right place where they needed to before we lose them. Because a lot of times, once they come on, and if you feel like they're talking to a bot, they're like, give me a live person, operator. So our whole thing was really quickly getting them to the place they needed to and get them the solution they needed to. So for us, when we were looking at solutions, we wanted something that was affordable, easy to use, and provide a lot of training since, for us, we don't really have that, it's we wanted something that's very easy to use, help us collect the data. And then if we needed hand-holding in terms of how we navigate this thing, we had someone who could basically walk us through that with either, best practices or case studies. So when I was listening to, the keynote earlier, I think he talked about a lot of the issues that we actually, encountered when we first started.
That's great,
I think Miranda drives. She drives a really important point on the technology aspect, which is moving it from transactional into engagement, and I think that's using AI and chatbots to find what you need or to solve something, and I think that's the progression that you come in at the entranceway and you can use it for that cost savings that Aakrit talked about, the 70 cents, to be able to reduce some of the basic interactions that don't require intense cognitive computing. And I think that's some of the areas you face exactly with your non-technology leaders, is they say, well, we want to use AI, we want to use NML, but those things, when they come together, can be very complex. You have to decide between that transactional phase and that I guess that gateway versus that vision matrix and the interactive of really getting into some deeper engagement.
That's a great point, David. And actually, Aakrit, if I can ask you to provide, you're probably the grizzled veteran, even though I think you're the youngest of us on the panel, but you're the grizzled veteran when it comes to solving these types of problems. When you reach that, some of the issues that Miranda or David just talked about, how do you view it? How would you solve it?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I could I could go on for another 4 keynotes just talking about answering those questions, right? Because it's something that's obviously so close to my heart, and problems we've been seeing for years and years now. I think the first challenge or one that I or we constantly advise anybody who's interested in adopting AI is start simple and start small. The number of times that people try to do too much with the technology too early, we see it so often, and every single time we never see it work, because you'll invest so much in the initial training period, in the initial development stage, because you're trying to do so much so early without actually learning much of how it will work for your customers. So the one thing that we say is that, look, start small, start simple, start with a few use cases for one type of customer, see how it's working, how are customers responding to it, and then sort of build from there. Just like any new business or any new startup takes a few years before it finally gets to a stable point. Obviously, I'm not going to say over here that AI is going to take a few years to implement for everybody, but in that same analogy, it is an evolution, right? It's not something that you can just turn on the flip of a switch and everything starts working. It requires consistent training, consistent upgrades, consistent analysis to see what's working, and eventually, sort of keep building from there based on what your customers want.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think the starting point is very critical, and actually on the research report, the 2 priorities that were selected at the top by 35% of survey respondents, or 38%, were advertising and awareness and shopping and e-commerce. And actually, Miranda, you talked a little bit. You started talking a little bit about Paybby's experience with interacting with customers when they're and trying to solve their problems. Can you, when thinking about chatbots for marketing, what sort of what are your perspectives there?
Well, I think a lot of times, when people are engaging your company, it's like that first, like you want to engage them before you lose them. So for us, it's really important, like, for us to kind of have something that was quickly allows them to talk to someone at the company. So a lot of times for our Paybot, that's what we call our chat box, the Paybot, our whole thing was like trying to figure out what they needed help with, and then getting them ready to, when they actually connect to their customer service, they have everything they need to talk to the customer service, so we could quickly help them. So like, for Paybby, our whole thing was like, we were helping a lot of companies with the PPP loans. So for PPP loans, a lot of them, there was a little bit of education for them in terms of like, documents they needed, if they qualify with the process. So we tried basically using our Paybot to kind of get all the information they needed before they talked to someone from customer support. So that was one. And then we also had so we had to figure out like the channels pretty quickly, and we had to tune it too. Because like when we first started, we kind of had this whole navigation, this whole customer journey. But then we realized as we tested it out, hey, maybe a lot of people are asking about this, and then we start tuning it a little more and more and more to make it the flow much better. So I would say there's definitely a lot of a lot of tuning, and then you need time to really to train the bot to really understand like what your customers are looking for, and to basically help them provide the resources they need to quickly help the customers. But I mean, our whole goal is like, how do we make the bot like more like less like a bot, more natural, so they feel like, when they're talking to the bot, it's like they're talking to a real person. They could get everything they need versus like they feel like, oh my God, this is just a bot. They're just trying to like, so for us, I think in terms of where we're at now, I think the technology is really good. It definitely saves the company time in terms of getting them on board. And I would love to see how the technology evolves more in the next couple of years, where it feels even more natural, like they're talking to, a real person, and we can maybe, save more money in terms of having them, talk to the bot to get what they need before they, we have them talk to our sales team or talk to our customer support team.
That's great.
I find it, it's interesting that Sanjib, that marketing and advertising are the top ones, because to me, marketing and advertising are what you want the customer to know, or what you want, the message you want to pretend. And I think where the technology is, or where it has to be right now, is meeting the customer where they are and what they want. So that's what I think Miranda is talking about, is finding out what they need. And if you don't strike a balance between those two, of what you want them to know and what they need, it can result in a conflict that lowers adoption or engagement. So I think that's a very delicate balance, is how do you meet the customer in the point, whether it be the point of the day or the point of their life or wherever they are, and what they're looking for, as opposed to what you want to portend to them. And I think that's what's different about these platforms, other than traditional marketing and advertising. You're showing a commercial, you can go out there and it's made for everyone. In this sense, when you're using AI, the whole aspect of that is the artificial aspect there. That is the cognitive aspect of it, is meeting the individual customer where he or she may be. And I think that's the challenge you have to keep in mind, and that balance between what you want to send out, what message you want to portray, and what they're looking to get.
That's a great point, David. And actually, just to dovetail on that, you've worked on several of these initiatives too. Like how have you been able to put yourself, meet that customer where they're at, as opposed to thinking about it more from a broadcasting perspective, the traditional marketing perspective?
It's challenging, and I think that's the idea of that's a concept of inclusive design from the outset. Try and think of as many demographics as possible. It's very hard because you don't want to be too biased. And I think we, as we were getting together as a panel talking in preparation, they gave a lot of examples of inherent bias that comes through in chatbots and voice technology, and I think that's a real challenge. It's very hard to suppress inherent bias. And some examples you give is having friends with accents who use a chatbot, a voice chatbot, and the chatbot assumes that they're speaking another language, or responds back in the wrong way. We've all heard the examples of gender bias, and that the naming of of voice assistants and things like that. So it's we have to do our best to wear that lens of accessibility, inclusivity from the outset when we're doing the design, and that's a process of bringing designers up through the entire process and letting them understand what the end user, who the end user might be, and trying to have and taking a step back. You don't want to catch that at the release. You want to try and do it from the outset.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, advice. And just one thing I wanted to add on your original insight from the report, Sanjib, was around what sort of the respondents are looking for. I found the fact that a large number of people were actually thinking about commerce as use cases very fascinating. If you go back to some of the stuff that maybe I touched upon in the keynote as well, right? It was sure customer support is a bit of low hanging fruit, but now use cases are evolving and moving more to interacting with customers right when they first get in touch with them. And I think the ability of AI to actually now facilitate transactions is definitely a lot better. And we definitely feel that's going to be an increasingly important area where this technology can have an impact in the long term.
That makes a lot of sense.
And actually, if I could add something, Sanjib, I think also one of the things that's really great about about this technologies is that it allows you to actually collect a lot of data. So when the customer first come on board, our whole thing is like figure out what is it they're looking for. But during that process, we want to collect as much information as possible. Sometimes they're angry about something, sometimes they're upset about a product, or sometimes they're like something's not working. So like it's also like a great way for us as a company to collect information about our customers and kind of profile like our customer in terms of like are most of them female, most of them male, where are they coming from, what is the problems they're having, and a lot of that data we have, like we actually collect them, and then we try to analyze that. We put like an insight report in terms of the data we're collecting. It gives us a lot of information about our customers, about like which helps them, for example, like product roadmap, maybe some of the stuff that they want in the future. We look into that. A lot of times it also helps us understand who is our customer, and what is that profile of our customers. And we actually market them services or products, we're better to understand them. And I think a lot of times when people think about the technology, they're thinking it as a way of saving money, as a way to engage, the way to do that. But another way is actually, I think the technology is actually really great is as a research tool to really understand your customers and what they're looking for, because you could actually collect a lot of data just from either text or just from voice. Where basically, I have actually done this like a lot of companies in my one of my prior to Paybby, we used to work with a lot of like global companies, where we basically had to take their data from customer support or social to really help them understand like what is the for R&D or for to better profile their customers. So I think that's something that I think a lot of companies also miss, is that it's such a wealth of data that's actually collected when the customer actually talks to the bot, either text or voice.
That's a great point, Miranda. And I think not thinking about this in a silo, but as part of the broader business, as part of the broader customers, is really critical. And I think actually, Aakrit, during your keynote, you talked about how that was actually one of the points, as far as like, for example, talking about voice and chat in sort of in conjunction, as opposed to two different things. Like anecdotally, from your technology is used by so many companies. Like, is that the typical way that they do it, or like, do you see people sort of going into it in a silo and then expanding? How does it typically work? How have you seen it work?
Yeah. Currently, for the most part, people think of chat and voice as two separate sort of directions and two separate technology to deploy. Like if you noticed, even in the past 20 minutes that we've been speaking, Miranda has mostly been talking about chat and chatbots, and to her world right now, voice seems fairly far away. And then I know David previously has done a fair bit of work in voice, and to him maybe messaging or chat seems like a different channel. So currently, Sanjeev, the short answer to your question is that people think of them differently. People think the purpose of a chat bot or a voice bot mean different things. A lot of times, for many of us, voice and AI also refers to things like Alexa skills, or Google Assistant actions and things like that. So those also, fall in they're also meant for a very different purpose compared to, let's say, maybe what a chatbot is. So today, the experiences as well as the implementation, for the most part, is siloed. However, that's where the industry as a whole is trying to encourage people to think of them as a holistic strategy versus just disparate individual experiences. I think right now also what happens is, uh, again, I'm just going to use Miranda's example, right? Like her job at her company right now is CMO, and as marketing, for her, it's most important that the first customer has a great experience, and she's able to convert it into an interested buyer or a lead for that matter. But that's about it, right? I think holistically, to think about, okay, look, could you implement something on for voice for this, maybe it won't work. Maybe it's not the right use case. But then how do you, at an enterprise-wide, think about some of these pieces? I think that's a challenge that organizations will kind of solve over a period of time. But today, the decision making and solutions are very function specific, and for that function, whatever works best. And in that sense, the implementation is also silent.
You start talking about inclusive design, and how does that sort of fit into the picture in terms of like thinking about the customer very holistically and beyond just like a single silo of a chatbot? I know, and also if you could talk a little bit about some of the types of applications that you've actually worked on and some of those experiences with this, that would be very helpful, I think, for the audience. David?
Oh, sorry, you were cut off earlier. I wasn't sure if you were asking myself or Aakrit. Yeah, the example I can give that I really learned through working in the voice community, and I like to talk to is using voice technologies for deaf consumers, employees, or deaf consumers or employees, and I think that's an example where it sounds kind of doesn't seem natural. Why would you use voice technology to engage or enable deaf employees? And what you have in the technology platforms now are the ability to assign a voice to someone and enable them to participate on an equal level in a conference or a meeting. The ability to recognize a voice and assign a pattern so they can follow along in a conversation. The ability to allow a speaking individual, someone with hearing, to speak and have that immediately converted into text and convert tone. So I think it's about really, that's, you have to think so far out of the box. Same as how can, how can voice be used for, visual aids for the blind? And that's, that also sounds, a little challenging. And the best example, that I had in my experience is going to explain a platform for a blind employee. It was a platform called IRA, and the person who I had explained it was a deaf employee using a tool called Ava. And I think that complexity shows you what these tools can bring to the table in terms of a level of quality. In this space, another example when we talk about equality is the work that Miranda is doing in terms of reaching underserved communities and finding out that the way information is conveyed and the structure of that information is very different for different communities and populations based on their knowledge set, based on their access to both the content, but also maybe the technology itself. And I think those are the questions you have to have developers and designers ask themselves as they approach the process at the outset. It's very hard. It's tough work. It's very difficult to make sure you have inclusive design and think of that, because you can't think of, it's very hard to design for everyone or everybody. Their needs are so dispersed. The difference between someone in an underserved population who might have little access to financial tools versus someone with a physical disability or both. It's just I think a process of trying to have those in mind from the outset and trying to be as equitable as possible to the design as you approach that from the outset.
Thank you, David. And actually, I wanted to ask both Miranda and David, when Aakrit was giving his keynote, he talked about L1 interactions being, really, I think, a great starting point for chatbots, because they can do some things well, they can't do a lot of other things well. And I think complexity tends to muddle up the results, if you will, a little bit. From your, Miranda and David, from your perspectives, what was your reaction to Aakrit's comment about L1, customer interactions being the right place right now? chatbots. Yeah.
Well, when he said that, I totally get what he was talking about. Yeah. Basically, we have, like, in our company, we think of, like, basically the chat box as the front line. They're like the first interaction a lot of our customers have when they engage with us. So we want to make it as easy to, and as engaging as possible.
Mhm.
So, and then one of the things we noticed is, like, maybe initially the first minute or two, maybe, it's like we're able to understand what the customer wants, but then as it goes on, we need to quickly, move it to the second tier, like, customer support, live person. Because a lot of times, I think the chat box is great to figure out, like, what the customer wants, trying to direct them to the right department, and to quickly figure out, like, what they're looking for. So, like, it saves time. But then, like, after a minute or two, then it's like the chat box start asking, like, similar questions over. They're like, oh no. It starts saying like a robot, and then he's like, okay, we gotta quickly, move them.
Yeah,
to the
we've
live
all
person.
we've all experienced that. We've all experienced at some point that infuriating chatbot.
I'm like, no, ask that again.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly actually what I would say is we've all experienced that infuriating IVR, and we've probably experienced that. How many years have we had IVR? 20, so maybe about 2 decades or so, and we're still in IVR having to pass through your credentials several times over and answer until don't tell me all the three of you haven't been there with a representative, agent. So that's what I mean. It's from what Aakrit says, we're at the early phases of adoption and development of this platform, and he also said something very critical. I thought which is start simple. If we can address those things that we know from further mature platforms up at the outset here, we might be able to take it much further. If we find ourselves in another decade still having to yell at the chatbot or to yell at the voice assistant as we are yelling at the IVR, I think we've done ourselves an injustice as technologists.
I agree with you. I wouldn't be satisfied with my life's work if that was to be the case.
Well, that's a great segue to sort of the next set of questions I have, which is about, where do we go from here? And obviously I think we're all in agreement here that this is still the early days, but the later days actually can come fairly quickly, and yes. And so I wanted to get a little bit of, if you don't mind, a little bit of pontification or getting on the soapbox a little bit from each of you, as far as what you might see in the immediate term, like 1 to 2 years, and then even sort of longer term, 5 years and beyond. Who wants to go first? David.
All right, sure. I think again, this is my perspective. We could you're giving it a chance to say what we'd like. So what I'd like to see happen, and what I think would be a great opportunity, what I hope will come to terms, is cross-platform collaboration on standards, and making sure that so you asked earlier, what can we do? What kind of frameworks? Well, maybe it's, the good news is competition spurs development. It's an innovation. It's always been the case. That will never change. But what can we do when we layer collaboration and communication on top of that, so that we can have disparate platforms still leverage common techniques, common standards, policies, practices for equality, for inclusivity. And so you said, it's like I was saying earlier, it's very hard to consider that as a developer. How can you think of everybody that needs to be included on a platform? But if we have some standards that ask those questions, that push that now, and we work on that now, I think in 5 years we'll find much higher levels of adoption. If we don't, I fear that we're going to continue in Aakrit talked about where we are in that quadrant, the 4 quadrant, that we're in the lower left. I fear we won't move, upwards towards the upper right, because navigation, whether you're talking about voice or chat, will not develop fully. The internet, it's like the internet has been able. We have the ability to really navigate fully. And that's, you think about the early days versus now, it's you can bring in your own cognition to assessing the results. And I think that's somehow we've got to make sure we can incorporate that into both AI and voice, or chat and voice. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Miranda?
Okay, I think for me, like I see, like I think the technology where it's going to, I definitely see improving, like very rapidly next couple of years. I think now it's like we see it's very helpful, but after a couple of minutes, it's like you realize, hey, it's a robot. It's like you want to talk to someone for real. I think the technology. I mean, I feel the next couple of years it's going to progress, but I see this thing progressing very, very fast. Like I would say in 10 years or so, I think this technology would take over everything. Have you guys seen that movie She, where basically a guy fell in love with his operating system?
Or.
I can totally see it happening in 10 years where technology gets so smart. You're talking to either voice like Alexa, or you're talking to customer support. The person is so responsive, so engaging. like you wouldn't want to get off the phone, or you wouldn't want to stop, and then you would feel like a connection. So I feel like the next couple of years there's gonna be like some challenges where technology is going, because we're still collecting data. We're tuning the machines. By voice, also by text. I think NLP is the technology is getting smarter and smarter, but we still see a lot of challenges. I mean, so it's not going to be like overnight, but in then 10 years, I see literally everything will be like, it's the robots. And it'll be so real, you wouldn't even want to talk to a real person. Because when you talk to a real person, you're like, you're so dumb, give me to a robot. Now it's like, give me an operator. I want to talk to an operator. Get me out of here, right? But in 10 years, I think it'll be vice versa. You talk to a real person, you're like, get me off the real person. I want to talk to a robot who knows what they're talking about. So I see the technology getting really, really advanced in 10 years, where basically everything we use, every gadget will have this AI technology in it and deal with everything.
The good news there is it can be leveraged for good. It can be used. We can leverage that technology for like medical and health devices. So I think what we'll see evolve over the next, another thing in the background is enabling consumers or any consumers, both in terms of product but also of the technology, control their own data, select how they want their data to be used in AI, and that's where I think we'll get away from the fear of the robots taking over. If you can control in a very tangible way how your own data is being used and how you want to consume it through this AI, then I think that also will promote adoption and decrease fear.
That's actually a topic that hits near and dear to me, because that's actually my latest company. Enabling consumers to control how their data is being used for credit purposes, for example. And I think that's that actually speaks to, and I want to make sure Aakrit is able to give the question about his view ahead, but also I can, if I could ask Aakrit to also talk about, like, for example, like consumer and regulatory views around the world, and how that sort of fits into like how things might play out as well. Aakrit, if you could give some thoughts around that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, lots of, again, important points to touch upon there. So where do we go from here? I think, Sanjib, you meant short term, medium term, long term. I think short term, lots and lots of more solutions will get deployed. Lots and lots of more mistakes will be made, and we will all continue learning from there. There's one thing that I think now I feel like we're at that point now where if you think about any hype cycle of innovation or technology, I feel like we've gotten to the point now where the technology is mostly there. The challenge is implementation, design, and adoption. So I think, like, if you ask me that, could you take underlying AI technology and do anything with it to solve any specific problem? I would say the answer at a very high level would be yes. I think the actual design, implementation, adoption, awareness, inclusivity, like David mentioned, I think all of those are now the next set of problems that need to get solved, which I think is more medium term. I think that's more like 2 or 3 years, where I think there'll be some best practices, standards. You'll know what's the best way to build or design a conversational AI interface. You will understand what channels to start with first. There'll be a more sort of robust playbook set in that sense. And then longer term, 5 or 10 years, um, you know, I'm a more realist in that sense. I don't think in 10 years we'll have robots running around falling in love with each other or with us. I think it'll. I think because I'm sure the technology, I know that it's not there much yet. Or I do think that you know.
I think Aakrit.
We're in the business of we're in the business which one of the taglines we had as a company for some time was AI that puts humans first, because the whole idea was that we thought we imagine a world where there will be great homogeneity between people and machines, and essentially machines will become very good at doing things that are repetitive and redundant and do not require the creative cognitive element that people require to actually make decisions. So we think that longer term, that's where this tech goes to. Um, um, the last example I want to leave you with, and specifically this is my favorite thing I'd like to talk about when we think about this technology is uh, the analogy of ATMs and banks and what happened over there. 40 years back, 30 years back, the standard way of withdrawing money from a bank account or depositing a check was walking inside a bank branch, filling out, kind of a deposit slip or a withdrawal slip, going to the teller, and completing that transaction. When we first introduced ATMs, the whole idea was that it's going to automate everything. There's going to be no need to ever go to a bank branch. There's going to be no point of bank tellers and so on and so forth. In 2021, I don't see bank branches reduced at all. In fact, if anything else, they're the same or have gone up. And what ATMs have ended up doing is that they've taken away the stuff that was easier done by machines in the first place, such that if you do ever walk inside a branch today, the experience is actually not too bad, right? You tend to find a teller pretty quickly, and you tend to, if it's a more complex request, get it done. I know it doesn't hold true for all your banks, but I know that for the most part, the in-bank experiences become smoother because the ATM takes care of a lot of redundant work. Long story, but summary is that's what I think about AI, which is that in 10 years from now, it'll take away a lot of the easy, repetitive stuff to do across the board, and such that people will be left to complete more creative, complex tasks that we were always meant to do.
That's a great analogy. Okay, Miranda, please.
But it's really funny they use that example of banking, because actually what's happening now, because Paybby, we're a digital bank, so what's actually happening now is it's actually an Amazon moment for banking, where the whole banking industry is changing now, where you don't really even need retail banks. So the whole what's going on now is like digital banks is taking over. So it's kind of funny how but I totally agree. Like now you don't even need to go to a bank to deposit your check. You could just basically take a picture on your phone.
Exactly.
That's done. So I agree. I think technology, is moving pretty fast. And I hope you're right. I think, we're basically, technology and humans work together versus
Yeah. And so, and I did want to touch Sanjib on one point. I know we have only a minute left, but I wanted to touch 30 seconds about the regulatory aspect, because that's also an extremely important topic that we couldn't touch upon today. But short answer, privacy will become a real thing. More power to you and your company in what you're doing. It's definitely the need of the hour. And I think AI systems will learn to work with them versus against them. I think there'll be no other option. But I still do think that even with that, there'll be enough room available to innovate on technology.
That's great. Thank you very much, Aakrit. And we are sort of getting towards the end of the hour, and I wanted to thank everyone, all my panelists for joining us today. I want to thank Aakrit for the keynote, as well as all of the respondents to the survey. If you haven't downloaded the survey, definitely do so. I think there's a lot of great learnings there. And thank you, everyone. And looking forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Sanjib. Thanks, Miranda. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.